Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Acodis's LinkedIn Live event, where we today are going to deep dive into the world of generative AI and its transformative impact on enterprises. I'm your host, Kimala Tipton, and today we have a wonderful lineup of speakers. First off, we're joined by Vinod Kumar, who's Acodis's Senior Vice President of Technology and Consulting. Kishore Raj, who is also from Acodis, and he has responsibility for as the Vice President of Technology and Consulting, specifically on our AI practice. And then finally, we're honored to have Abhishek Singh, a partner at the Everest Group, who brings a wealth of expertise to the table. So without further ado, please engage, ask questions, and let's kick off our event with our first speaker, Vinod Kumar.
Thanks, Kimila. It's great to be here and honored to be part of this group of experts. Look, last 15 to 18 months, all we are hearing in the industry is about generative AI, right? It's ChatGPT, it's Bard, it's Llama. So there's a lot of these buzzwords, a lot of hype as well. But we believe that behind all the hype, there is real business value that's being created and will be created, right? So that's where we see a significant shift now in our client conversations from, okay, we know there is all these products and all these solutions in the market. What does that mean for us? And these conversations are happening across the board. There's board level conversation, CXO level conversation. Now we see increasingly at the execution level. Clients are talking to us. We are working with many clients talking about what specific business use cases are we going to bring this powerful technology to, right? So, which is a very, very interesting and very good progress that we see in the industry, right? So, from an Acodis standpoint, what we are helping our clients, navigate through this and really look for the business value is, while we look for these specific solutions in various areas, sales, marketing, HR, IT, and so on, we are looking at addressing this and helping our clients to look at much more broadly. Last 10 years we spent on digital enterprises, right? We are helping now on how do we help our clients in terms of becoming an AI enterprise of the future. That's much more broader conversation, right? So that's where we see the industry right now is, and significant opportunity for everybody in this space, both enterprises and all of us in this space. So good to be here and have further conversation around it. I would invite Abhishek to share his point of view because he looks at it from a industry expert working with multiple clients. So Abhishek, over to you. Your comments, please.
No, thank you so much. And you set the context right at the outset. We are close to celebrating the year one anniversary of the launch of ChatGPT, which proverbially set the cat among the pigeons. So that's what happened. And after that, we have seen a slew of offerings come up in this space, whether these are foundational models that we are talking about, specific in the very industry specific use cases that clients have started to work around. The shift that I'm able to see from my vantage point as a research analyst is that starting November of 2022 till about March, I prefer to call it the hype phase of generative AI, where everybody got super and hyper excited about the possibilities. And in many ways, a lot of people were using this term arms race of most organizations trying to tap into the possibilities of generative AI and figuring out what are the most important strategic use cases to use generative AI in. The winners there, in many ways, if I put it more from a supply and demand perspective, it was a largely supply-led market. The mothership platforms that exist within enterprises, whether this is Microsoft or Salesforce, Amazon, etc., what they were bringing out as offerings, as part of their embedded offerings or existing offerings, became the whole and soul of what enterprises started to experiment with. So that was the phase one. Since then, however, while that has continued to mature, the focus has shifted more towards pragmatic use cases, micro utilities, industry-specific use cases that clients are now starting to, one, curate and prioritize, like which are the ones that we really want to focus on, building some sort of a value equation around it. What are we really getting out of it? And whether or not generative AI is actually applicable to it. Because there is this big debate happening right now is that generative AI is not that magic wand through which you can change everything that is there in your enterprise ecosystem. Essentially, there is classical AI, there is machine learning, there are deterministic models, and then there is this probabilistic model called generative AI, which behaves a bit like humans. So what do we do with that? So in many ways, we are in a kind of a wave two, so to speak.
Thanks, Abhishek. Kishore, your comments, please, because you work with clients of Akkodis on a daily basis. Anything you would like to add?
I think one is to really looking at from an opportunistic point of view, right? Like adoption of use cases are there, but there are also a lot of challenges are coming up in the market, which most of the players as well as the customers are not really realizing it. They're really constraining a lot of innovation that's supposed to be happening. Right? There was a paper published by McKinsey also. There's a multi-million dollar of money is getting leaked, stumbled upon projects and all that. I think one is to look at it more from an opportunistic point of it, but there are also challenges, technology challenges, which is addressable. What the providers has to do in that space is very important. Just jumping onto it and adopting a use case without looking at what potential problems are is very important. And we could talk about it later on in this conversation much more deeper about it. I think that's very important to really consider it, both from a data perspective, from a model perspective. How do you optimize it? That's people have jumped onto it. A lot of startups have jumped onto it, but they're all stumbling on the innovation side of it. That's very important to consider.
That's a very interesting point that you mentioned, Kishore, because as you were speaking, I'm reminded of something that I'm going to present tomorrow. We are releasing kind of the results of a survey that we have done with almost like 45 to 50 CIOs and chief digital officers in the Fortune 200 space. One thing that is coming out from this analysis is that, and I like to quote a colleague of mine who has been using this phrase often, is that the adoption of generative AI in enterprises follows the velocity of the enterprises themselves, like the speed at which they operate. So if they are legacy, they are taking it at their own pace. If they are fast movers, early adopters, have been traditionally so, they are doing the same with generative AI. Hence, even in terms of generative AI's adoption specific to use cases, we are noticing that there are building blocks behind what sits where a generative AI sits, whether it is data management as a platform, whether these are legacy technologies that exist. There has to be some momentum to be put around those aspects before you start realizing value out of generative AI. So that's the first bit of, if I may throw the cat among the pigeons again, using that term again, the challenges or the hump that organizations need to cross even before they start realizing value out of it. So I don't know if any of you have any comments to share on that.
No, absolutely. I think, see, to add on to what you're saying is that while the technology, generative AI technology specifically, what's available in the marketplace became democratized, right? So it's available to everyone now, right? So they can really focus on building use cases that are of value to them, in the enterprises, identifying those value. But the implementation is not straightforward for the reasons that you and Kishore highlighted, right? Data being one, right? If you don't have the data to train these models, it's all about data, right? So how do you prep the data? How do you create the pipelines to power these models? Is coming as a challenge for what we are seeing in these enterprises, right? So one area where we are helping clients in that is, of course, we are bringing the industry knowledge and the technical capabilities in this space, given our experience in the AI space for last 7 to 8 years in the autonomous driving, because automotive is a big industry for us. So we kind of cut our teeth in that space. We're able to bring that in. But then when we go to the client base, like you said, right, the early adopters, they had already figured this out for their digital transformation. Some of the data pieces already taken care. So it becomes easy for in that space. But those ones were lagging, even in the previous version of a digital transformation avatar, is facing challenges. So absolutely, that's what we are seeing too in our actual implementation of use cases today.
Can you all talk about any specific use cases that you've seen that are common that enterprises are looking at, possibly in some specific vertical industries? Abhishek?
Oh, that's a very good question because I ought to answer this because I've been speaking to so many folks and need to have a summarized view of that. If I put it in three or four broad categories, and I can speak about industry specific ones too, but broadly across industries. Interestingly, what is coming out as the biggest bucket that organizations are trying to put it under, and I'm using my own term for it, different organizations may have different word for it, is this whole concept of knowledge management, which is around there is a latency in terms of any organizational task that each employee, each stakeholder within an organization has. So say, for example, if you're a customer service representative and trying to answer a question that is coming in from a customer in a healthcare case, say, for example, a patient, do you have that information to give an appropriate response and even structure it in a manner that is understandable? So that latency of where that information resides and how it comes to the individual responding and how he or she is able to structure that is one of the biggest problems that most organizations are trying to solve for. Now, extend this argument. Customer service is one aspect. There are HR policies that organizations need to be aware of. There are regulatory filings that a lot of organizations do. There are legal and other frameworks, terms, and conditions regarding procurement that organizations need to be aware of. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are currently focused on just wading through the treasure trove of knowledge, so to speak, that exists within the organization across functions, HR, marketing, manufacturing, etc., where generative AI can significantly reduce that latency of searching for that information and even summarizing it. So that's one of the biggest buckets. The second one, where I'm noticing a significant uptick now, that's where I go into becoming more industry specific, is synthetic data generation. Now, life sciences is one very good example wherein for clinical trials and other stuff, wherein you are kind of trying to run simulations, etc. In autonomous car driving, etc. We are noticing that creating simulations for testing autonomous cars. That's where generative AI can and is already playing a role. In the engineering life cycle, testing, for example, test case generations, etc. Huge amount of benefits that organizations can derive by using generative AI for that. So those are what I like to call as low-hanging fruits in many ways for what organizations can achieve out of it. But if I look at the spectrum of different functions, if you apply this lens of where you need summarization, where you need human ready responses, where you need to reduce the latency of knowledge within organizations, those are the primary criteria being applied in selecting the right kind of use cases. And if you start applying it to a specific industry, you will know what those use cases are.
Yeah, I think just to kind of add on to that, right? I think very, very good summarization, Abhishek, on this. Let me give you some specific examples of what we are implementing for our clients, right? The customer support that Abhishek talked about, whether it's in contact center or IT help desk, huge value proposition for clients. Okay, so today the implementations that we are doing for IT help desk, as an example, integrated with the chat system. In the past world, the chat system, employees and customers hated to use it. In fact, you want to save costs, so you force people to go to chat. Today, the system, because they were rules-based systems, right? Yes, no, and people hated that. Today, the system that we have implemented for a couple of our clients is integrated into a system like Teams. It's very difficult to differentiate between a human agent chatting at the back versus a agent. Versus a generative AI agent talking about it, because the natural language processing capabilities of these technologies are very powerful. So, to Abhishek's point, huge value we already see in implementation of real use cases around help desk and contact center when it comes to giving this knowledge at the fingertips of the agents so that they can answer these questions of clients quickly across the board. These are what we call as horizontal solutions. Kind of, it can be applied to every industry, help desk, contact center. There is a lot of use cases I'm seeing on application development, right? Application development, co-pilot solutions. But another interesting thing that we are doing on that area is one of the biggest bottleneck for our clients is application modernization, because we don't know what is there in the code, which has been written 30 years, 25 years back. So that used to be a big impediment for digital adoption. So we have solutions which actually goes through the existing code and then gives documentation recommendation on what's there in the code. right? So that's a very good starting point for now. You feel confident to rewrite an application because you know what is in there. So those areas, again, common use cases across the board. IT operations, generative AI IT operations, right? Network operations centers, security operations centers, right? There is a lot that we can do in a generative AI in tandem with other machine learning models. Okay. Now, those are more horizontal solutions that we see, a real implementation of them, and to again Abhishek's point on the vertical solutions, right? For example, in insurance company, they are hit with tons of documents, right? Generative AI is very well fit for summarizing the documents. Whether it's claims loss analysis, whether it is underwriting, whether it is customized policy pricing, things like that, which is heavily document oriented. Again, big use cases in that. Life sciences, Abhishek touched upon. So there are a bunch of horizontal and vertical use cases that are real, getting implemented or already implemented. But the beauty of these solutions is that it's not just one-time implementation, right? The model is constantly and continuously learning. So if you look at our services that we offer is in line with that, right? So we help our clients to do business and use case identification. That's a big area because clients come to us and say, hey, where do you see the maximum value for us? Okay, so these are the use cases for that particular industry. Then we even help with model selection. What models fit for that use case? Then there is model training, deployment, ongoing fine-tuning of the model, because that's where the bigger value is, right? If you're not training your model, whether it's human reinforced learning or proactive training of this model, the value is limited. So there are a lot of services our clients are looking for in this space, specifically when it comes to real implement tangible use cases that are already in production or things that are getting implemented today.
Yeah, I'll only add prompt engineering to it. I know you would have covered that anyway, because then it completes the entire spectrum of things that we are looking
I was going to ask you that question, Abhishek, right? Because you see, the skill sets I'm seeing in these implementations are something which was not there 6 months back, right? So skill sets, like new skill sets, like prompt engineering, machine learning, experts have been there, but it's now taking a different connotation in a larger implementation. So any thoughts around that, right? I just wanted to make sure that you are able to give a broader perspective from what you are seeing on the skill sets as well.
Mm-hmm.
No, absolutely. That's probably the $1 million question here, because this whole aspect of what impact does generative AI has on skill sets, and there are many vectors in which we can think of it. There are aspects wherein we know that generative AI will have a significant impact, so it will reduce human dependencies on those tasks. We know about that. So those are the aspects that we talk about, the tasks that might get eliminated by generative AI. So that's one bucket. The second one is where it will start evolving those tasks in terms of productivity. And that's where the entire discussion around human in the loop concept that's happening right now, like all of these pieces, even looking at the software development lifecycle, whether it is designing, documentation, refactoring of code generation, testing, and finally maintaining the entire life cycle of it. I mean, there are so many ways in which generative AI can act as a co-pilot for each of these activities. And depending on the share of what it can contribute, I mean, you can have the level of human in the loop defined for it. But one thing I'm definitely noticing is that this entire debate about hey, generative AI is going to take over the world or replace or eliminate a lot of jobs. I don't really believe in that, because consistently in all conversations, what is clearly coming out is that most of the enterprises see generative AI as improving the productivity of organizational tasks and employees, not necessarily thinking about eliminating those. So that's a very nice way of thinking about it. And that is why, as we are thinking of certain roles wherein evolution and new roles that might get established, like roles which are looking at primarily the explainability of AI, how you run an audit trail of where that data is coming from, data curation and data management. I mean, may or may not be directly related to the models themselves, but it's an important foundational activity that needs to be done. Then we are talking about fine tuning of models that we are talking about. Prompt engineering, in many ways, is turning out to be one huge bucket on which organizations will define how generative AI gets used, because depending on persona and other stuff, that will play out. And last but not the least is this entire bucket of data access and data privacy. Like, hey, there are a lot of data that is going into these models. One aspect is the explainability, where it is coming from. The other aspect is the access part of it. So if I, as say, for example, a junior level employee in an organization, I'm trying to search for incentives that are available, I should be able to access only those incentives that I originally had access to, and not for everyone in the organization just because the model has been fed on organizational data. So how does generative AI models themselves build in that access element into it? Because one thing I want to lay out up front, because this is one of the very basic fundamental thumb rules I use, is generative AI is probabilistic in nature. It is not a deterministic model. So what lies underneath it is very difficult to figure out. It just predicts the next word as it is bringing out the responses. For it to be deterministic and have the accuracy that we are talking about, generative AI needs to work with machine learning and deterministic models in tandem. And that is why, as we speak about generative AI, eventually we'll start talking about generative AI in the context of broader AI as a concept.
Yeah.
And then there are other elements and skills that would be needed to make it successful.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I think that's where Kishore is spending a lot of time with our
Right.
clients on data, both on data for training. You also highlighted a very important point, what the output it's delivering, right?
Yeah.
You need to have right data, getting accessed by the right people and so on. So I think
Mhm.
over to you, Kishore. You have spent a lot of time with our clients on this.
Yeah, I mean, I want to add to what Abhishek is saying, like the TRISM framework, right? It's kind of a bi-directional relationship between the trust that it establishes, it has to establish, the risk element associated and the security element, right? That framework is very, very critical. That's important skill. And we've been talking to a couple of telecommunication companies, and they are really challenged in this particular space because the trust element is very, very important factor here. That you talked about the explainability aspect of it, the biases element associated with it, and all of that. So that's an important one. And again, coming back to the original question Kimala asked, is the use cases, right? The most important one, the personalization is really catching up a lot in the market space, right? What generative AI can do, primarily related to the point that Abhishek you mentioned, the synthetic data. So much only you can personalize with what data you have, but the synthetic data adds to that, amplifies that personalization, right? The other thing is so much we have been doing in AI ML, the forecasting model and predictive models, but no, to your point, the simulation, the scenario building is where the power of generative AI coming. Bringing all these three things together is where we see a much higher use cases generating out of it. Like fraud management side of it, workforce management side of it. We are having various conversations to really bring these capabilities together. That's where we see higher ROAs are coming. So I see that time and again, we say use cases. I see it's more like a traditional AI, very automation oriented one. But when you bring in these elements together, is where we see the power of Gen AI is coming in. Adding to the last point, you also the product side of it, like the design aspect of it. Generative AI can create so much of product design variances in a much lesser, shorter time frame. That is really helping. A lot of innovation could happen primarily in the product oriented aspect of it. So we are having a lot of conversation with customers. For example, surface design in an automotive world, it's a pretty big ask now. So how do we really bring a lot of variances in the surface designs? So those are some additional use cases we are seeing a lot of interest is coming from our customers. We have a lot of conversations going on there. Just hand it over to Kimala for the next directions for us. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just add one comment before Kimila jumps in, is that the co-pilot aspect that Abhishek brought up, right? This co-pilot concept is really applicable across a lot of use cases we are saying, right? It's very important in the other comment also Abhishek mentioned in terms of concern around the elimination of jobs, right? So the co-pilot is applicable in application development to service desk to all sort of areas, because it's really assisting the human that's doing. So the way we need to look at it is, it's not about losing job, it's about doing the job better now. Okay, because these powerful technologies available with you, we couldn't have an assistant. I wish I had an assistant always with me. Now I have an assistant for doing various different micro jobs that I have. So it's actually augmenting the capability of the humans. Um, at some point in time, I would think as the companies grow, they may not add as many headcounts as they would have added in the past, but really the value, the way I am looking at it is augmenting human potential through AI. That's where I see it. Yeah.
That's a very interesting point. And Camilla, I'm again coming in,
That's
holding
okay.
you up in many ways. Because what Vinod was pointing out towards this whole aspect of skills that are needed and how organizations can adopt it has another element to it, which is coming out in most conversations these days. This relates to the kind of curiosity that has now grown within organizations, whether these are power users, specific lines of business units, etc., who now, having experimented with the B2C version of generative AI, feel that, hey, some of the tasks and activities that they can do, generative AI can have a strong role for it. Now, interestingly, a side effect of what's happening because of this is that when these power users, business unit owners are reaching out to CIOs and CDOs with a list of use cases where they feel or are requesting for generative AI investments, CIOs and CDOs are noticing that a lot of these use cases that they are bringing to them are actually solvable using existing digital investments that they have already paid for, which these same users were not adopting or were sluggish in adoption. So think about it that way. What side effect this is starting to have is, in many ways, the consumption gap that existed within a lot of these organizations, wherein they had made certain digital investments, but organizational consumption was not at par. Generative AI is also having a sidebar effect in terms of that. So that's point number one. Second thing is, a lot of CIO CDOs believe, and we ought to believe in this fact, that since we are talking about Copilot, is that every organizational task or every employee can have some sort of a Copilot eventually. I mean, that's the art of the possible. But the big question here for CIO CDOs is how to build or educate employees in the usage of these tools, because that's another barrier that they have, because technology is there. I'm pretty sure there are 10 tools within the organization that are available for my disposal where I am working. I probably don't know how to use it. That's also a big opportunity on which generative AI is creating kind of a momentum in favor of that. So think about it this way. There is this concept of citizen developers that is getting increasingly talked about, that everybody in the organization, whether or not you are a certified engineer, software engineer, there will be a time soon enough wherein they will be able to write their own code, write their own applications, because the Copilot aspect will help you do that.
Mm-hmm.
Even for that, you will require education on how to use that tool. So that's another big opportunity to be thinking about as we are all thinking of reskilling, driving organizational productivity. And last but not the least, which is unrelated to AI or Gen AI, but still getting impacted by it, is driving consumption of existing non-Gen AI digital tools.
So with that said, Vinod, can you talk about a little bit around the services that support what clients need and how Acodus is addressing that?
Great question. I kind of briefly touched upon it, but let me give you some idea about what we are seeing as customers need today. Right now, there are different phases in which our customers are. Right, like Abhishek said, there are early adopters and there are people who are lagging. Right, but all of them, their starting point is, where do I use this power of the powerful technology? Right. So start with use case identification. So we are working with clients on identifying industry-specific use cases in automotive, in insurance, in life sciences, right? So those are the starting points. So there is a service or offering that they want from providers like us to help them with that decision. Okay. Then comes the question, okay, now what technology do I use? Specifically, what models do I use to implement that use case? So the second thing that they come to us is model selections, right? So we have an offering where we help clients to select the right model, fit for purpose models. We then come into the point of, okay, where do we find the data to train it? So there's a lot of work around data services, right? Abhishek also brought up this point as well, right? The data is key here, right? So that's one. Then we talk about model training, right? We need, I was looking at one of the client conversations I had recently. Like some of the skills is like large language model specialist. It's non-existent, 12 months back. Nobody was talking about it. So we need experts like that to train the models, whether it is large language model, Gen AI models, or traditional, machine learning models, right? So that's the element. So training trainers, model training assistants, deployment assistants, right? And then ongoing fine tuning of those models. And then full stack engineers. Finally, these models have to be put to use through some piece of software or the front end, right? Whether it's through a bot or through a web page, you need full stack developers to build some of the solutions. And then we are looking at customers talking about big area of focus. All these things, like we went through this 10 years back. Everybody jumped onto cloud. Then they realized that cloud costs have skyrocketed. Here you are going to be hit with GPU charges. These are not. So there is a big area of focus that we are working with clients on. How do you optimize the infrastructure for AI, right? How do you optimize GPU utilization, both on model training as well as ongoing usage of the GPU capabilities. So these are various services that we see. I'm sure it's evolving as we speak. Like a lot of new skills are getting developed. Like I said, annotation services used to be very limited to autonomous driving. We have, like I said, because of our pedigree, we have spent a lot of time on that. But now annotation services is needed in every domain, whether you have data annotation, video, pictures, and so on. So those are the things that we see today. But I would tell you that every day we are discovering new stuff. Right? These are the services I need. This is what we need to take to the market, and skill sets as well.
Right.
To add, if I can add there, like Vinod pointed out, AI impact matrix is a framework we take it to a customer to really look at the realization model behind Gen AI, value realization model, and also the AI orchestration blueprint that we have really help the customer to put together the right architecture behind it, the computational aspect of it, the data aspect of it. Initially in my conversation, I mentioned about two major significant problems that's coming up in the market. We have an offering there, what we refer to as performance sentinels. So I would like to talk about that, and then probably well, also wanted Abhishek to add to that. The two major problems are there in the market today, right? It's really constraining innovation. I mentioned earlier. One is the data-related challenge, another the model-related challenges. The bigger problem is a large volume of data is coming in and it's really skewing up the computational expenses, right? Really skyrocketing expenses are coming out of these use cases. So the data reduction aspect is a very critical offering that we take it to market for our customers, simplifying, compressing those data. Thereby you're bringing a lot of efficiency in the whole use case scenario, less resource intensive it is. That is one aspect of it. The second biggest problem is the model by itself. Huge, large models by the name itself is consuming huge amount of computational power. That's really costing a lot of no cost element to skyrocketing cost element to it, especially when you're running it in the cloud. So distillation of the model is a great offering we are offering in the market. We're also looking at micro model architectures that rather than a large model architecture. So all of this, what we are looking at to really bring the performances high, but also the computational requirement down. So the two framework, part of our Adoptive AI framework, what we have, the name itself, unless you address this problem, the adoption is going to be a challenge. So one is the data genome framework that we have and tools associated with it, and the other one is the model prune framework and the tools associated with it. So we strongly believe this is required in current scenario. And as I mentioned, McKinsey has really went into the market and saw there's millions and millions of money is being bleeded because of this problem, unable to progress on the innovation side as well. The advantage, if you address it right from the beginning, we believe that business will be very competitive here and will be very cost effective also. This is another offering widely spoken in the market today. There's a big challenge and people have rushed into adoption, but this is where the stumble blocks are there. I'd like to ask Abhishek also to add to this what he sees, what he's hearing. That'll be great. Yeah.
No, absolutely. You are bringing us to focus on something which is really key to how organizations should actually be thinking about not only model selection, but model curation. You talked about micro models. Yeah. We are hearing a lot about that because depending on the use cases that you are picking up, as you are starting to focus on these so-called micro utilities, you don't really need models which have hundreds and thousands of parameters to build data on top of it. And that's why this whole concept of large language models versus small language models, you are calling it micro models, etc. That is a big debate happening right now, because whichever models are allowing you the curation of models which can follow this concept and help you reduce compute costs significantly, should be the way forward. And there has to be some sort of a dynamism in helping select models with limited set of parameters, because if you say, for example, you want to use generative AI simply for, say, your legal responses. I'm just making that up, for any organization which does a lot of reviews of legal data, terms and conditions, etc. There is only a limited set of information that you really need to make the model learn upon. So you don't really need to spend in computational power, which, going back to the old concept of cloud, you are leaving a big part of the computation power redundant. You're not using it at all. So utilization is an important aspect. So how to identify not only the use cases, the appropriate models for that, and that's where the evolution of industry is happening right now. I have a chart with me which has like almost like 60 to 70 different kind of models which are specific to functions, specific to industries. We are looking at micro utilities. The only risk there is, and that's what CIOs and CDOs are asking, is they're not sure of the future viability of a lot of these models. And that's where your help is needed in understanding, in helping clients do some sort of a diligence on those models. Like if you are working with certain models, I'm pretty sure if you're bringing them as partners, you are doing that diligence on that. So whether or not these are sufficient enough for the use cases, are these models well invested, they are financially going to stay true. I mean, that's also there, because every day a new venture funded third party app or a model is popping up. And lastly, the future of the technology architecture that we are talking about, how many eggs can we really put in this kind of a model? So if it's an umbrella model with multiple micro models and you see the future viability of that, I think that's the best way forward. People would love to do that with mothership platforms like Microsoft and Salesforce if they were doing all of that. But I doubt most of these mothership platforms will go beyond their standard set of use cases in which they are bringing embedded offerings. What they are doing, however, is creating those marketplaces wherein people are coming and building models on top of their platforms. Exactly. So that's probably the way forward. There's no end to this debate right now. The jury is still out. We all have to figure out the best suggestion that we can give to our customers. But your point was spot on. This is the money problem right now.
So with that, we're going to conclude this portion of the presentation, but I do want to thank you, Vinod, Kishore, and Abhishek, for your great insights into this market. We've heard about how the importance of aligning generative AI with our use cases, ensuring readiness across technology, culture, and governance, and leveraging this powerful technology to drive real world value for enterprises. So, as we think about the future, we've heard the generative AI, and for the enterprise, it's boundless, lots and lots of opportunity. And together we're charting the course toward a more innovative, efficient, and successful future. So now we're going to go to a couple of questions. One question we have is, how do you handle dealing with the privacy aspect of the data in generative AI?
Kishore, you want to take that question? There seems to be some technical glitch there.
Oh.
So he's unable to hear us. Yeah, look, I think, Abhishek can also add to it. Like, one of the things that we are working with our clients is, like to earlier comment, right? You can have a umbrella model or you can have a micro model. So the answers would differ, right? If it's a micro model specific for a specific use case, then we approach the data and privacy very differently versus an umbrella model, right? Because what ends up happening is that if it's an umbrella model, you are actually pumping in all this data into the system, and you need to worry about who accesses what, right? If it's a micro model, you're building it for a sales team or a finance team, you know exactly what the personas are, and therefore you can control the data differently in terms of training as well as retrieval of data, okay? Now, there are tools that we see coming up in the market as well, right? Which is the good old tools of data privacy, data classification, data tagging, and things like that we are leveraging to ensure that the right data gets fed into the systems and trade.
Sorry, I didn't realize that the question was to me. Yeah, so if it's a privacy aspect, of course, goes with anywhere, right? Like, all these GDPR, PCI, and all that. So one is the consent and transparency has to be declared. That's one aspect of it.
Yes.
The data minimization, right? We keep talking about this data, right? The minimization is very, very important. Absolute necessity data that you pump into the models, right? And you get derived out of it. That is a very important key aspect of it. And then the what they call it, data masking or anonymization, they call it, and that's also an important one when you run the models, data through the model. So those are the ways you can address the privacy aspect of it. Other than that, of course, regular auditing, governance is very primary important. And like earlier, Abhishek pointed out about explainability, right? That is going to become a big key element when it comes to these privacy compliance and all that. You need to be able to explain what you're delivering out of this. Also, that also ties back to the trust element and the data privacy element of it.
Yeah. And just to summarize, I think there are a few points that you mentioned that I think are very important to emphasize. Vinod, you have been talking about this whole aspect of annotation when it comes to data, whether it's images, whether it's text, etc. It has an implication on privacy side also, because as we are speaking of access management and who should have access, and the question of IP, intellectual property, in relation to whatever data is coming in, whether it's code or anything like that. Annotation has a long way to go in kind of ensuring that sort of audit trail is maintained as regards who has access, where it is coming from, and how it is going to get used, because there is also this big question of hallucination that is also playing up, because it can create things. Generative AI can create things, and we need to assert that here. So that's why this question of privacy needs to be dealt in many more dimensions, and that's why it's an evolving process here. It's not set in time like we speak of typical enterprise applications where identified data or personally identified data with non-personally identified data, you can just in RDBMS set a marker to it. In this case, because of the creativity aspect of generative AI, there is an element of audit trail that needs to be additionally maintained. And that is why when we speak of privacy in generative AI, we don't speak of it in isolation. We talk about all those concepts. When Kishore mentioned explainability, we have talked about privacy as concept in isolation, explainability being one, ownership and IP we discussed, and there is this whole aspect of bias and ethicality, etc., which form part of the 3 or 4 pieces of what we like to call the risk aspect of generative AI, which is the safety first aspect of generative AI that most organizations need to take care of first. In many ways, that's the first term, because a lot of organizations who you speak with, initially in that hype phase itself, clamp down on any usage of the B2C versions of generative AI, chat GPT, everything.
Yes.
Because they didn't know what is going to happen, with data coming in from outside, and plus also internal data starting to flow outside. So that's a risk they know, and it has all of these elements.
Another an important thing is coming up in the market called user-controlled AI, right? That
Yes.
Predominantly it's going to get into the regulatory side also. It's as good as like you have a profile on your Gmail accounts, and you have the freedom to delete what they can have about your privacy information. So AI has to have that user-controlled interface that will become a regulatory requirement. So we need to figure that out, how this will be integrated into the solution. Yes, that's another one coming up.
All right. So I think we'll start closing and provide a couple of closing comments. We do encourage all of you to connect with these speakers, continue the conversation, continue to ask questions, share your thoughts and questions in the chat. And thank you so much for joining us today. In closing out, Vinod, Abhishek, or Kishore, do you want to add any closing comments?
No,
All right.
Abhishek, yes, thank you, Kimala, for hosting us. Really appreciate your thoughtful
Thank you, everyone.
I want to thank Abhishek for joining us.
Thank you, Abhishek.
This was a very good discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.